So over the last month, I read 5 books written by women, and instead of doing what I typically do where I just kind of openly discuss the books in kind of no particular order, I thought a fun thing to do would be to actually rank them in terms of what I actually enjoyed the most over the last month. And this really isn't a ranking in terms of their value or their importance or anything like that. They're really just a ranking of what I enjoyed most reading over the last month. I also want to briefly talk about kind of my ideology in picking these books and why I chose these 5 books, and that was really just because they looked interesting. There was no real deeper meaning, there was no real like, oh, I wanted to learn something. No, I really just picked them because I thought they looked cool, and when I was reading the back and kind of going over it, they really just piqued my interest at the right time. I was actually really close to reading Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own for this video, but as I was going to read it, my Harvard book sale books came in, and there was a couple in there that I was just more interested in, so I picked one of them for this video, and I'll be talking about it there. I also want to say this, and this isn't a spoiler or anything for the list, or really trying to like hype you guys up for number 1, but number 1 is legitimately one of the best books I've ever read. It's on par in terms of emotional impact as like Stoner by John Williams, which you know on this channel is like the staple of me and who I am in the 21st century. But yeah, there was really no specific theme or idea I was going through with these books. I kind of just chose them. Also, if you need to know which books I read, I'll put a link to the description to everything down below, and I also put a little like timestamps so you can see which book is talked about when, so you don't have to watch this entire thing. You can kind of skip to which book interests you. Okay, I think that's enough rambling for now. Let's start with... It feels blasphemous to put anything that Eve Babbitt's has written kind of on like the last of any list, but I think that's honestly just like a testament to the quality of books that I read this month. If you've never heard of Eve Babbitt's or even her book that I read here, Eve's Hollywood, Eve Babbitt's is like a staple of contemporary women's literature. She wrote a lot of her stuff about like life in Los Angeles, and that was really a main reason why I chose it. I moved out to Los Angeles in a post in, I guess, current social media era, and I was super interested in what life was like here before the boom of maybe like technology or internet. And what I got here was a really interesting account of what it's like to be a woman and what it's like to be a rich, independent, successful woman living in Los Angeles. And what's really interesting about Eve's Hollywood is, one, the fact that even on the back of the book, they talk about her very unique writing style, where they even say, and I quote, "And though Babbitt's prose might appear careening, she's in control as she takes us on a ride through an LA of perpetual delight." I don't think I've ever read a book that openly talks about the author's prose on the back of a book in a way that kind of compelled me immediately. And what I found reading this is, one, yeah, her prose is crazy. It's so stream of consciousness, but she also feels so deliberate in everything that she's saying. There isn't like a wasted word or sentence or phrase in here, and that was the most baffling thing I've ever seen. I've never read a book with stream of consciousness this like clear and concise before, because I think we can all agree when we get that kind of stream of consciousness style, some stuff does appear, you're like, what the hell is the point of this? But in Eve's Hollywood, everything feels deliberate. The reason I put this on number 5 on the list is because if you've never heard of Eve's Hollywood or who Eve Babbitt's is, this is actually kind of a collection of short stories or vignettes, which I was not expecting when I first went and actually got the book. And I think on my connection and my experience with short stories is, I've yet to ever find a short story collection where I love every single short story equally. There's always one that are so fucking incredible. And the specific short stories that I remember really standing out to me the most were Sins of the Green Death and then the Hollywood Branch Library. And I feel like this is always the case with me in short stories is there are always short stories that are so damn good in books like this that it makes other ones where they're not as interesting stand out even more. And I found about half this book to be absolutely utterly compelling. It is a really intriguing, beautiful snapshot of like 50s through 70s LA. I mean, this book was published in 1974 and it's her first work ever. I mean, she was like a magazine writer and stuff like that, and she wrote articles, but this is her first published work. And it's a jaw-dropping like debut of a story. But I kind of found myself not as enjoying about like half the short stories because some of the other ones were so incredibly spectacular that the ones that are even like okay just didn't really impact me that much. I must say though, I love the variety and length of short stories like this. It's not something to me with like F. Scott Fitzgerald where his short story collections are like 40 to like 50 pages each. There are short story collections in here that are 20 to 30 pages, and there are ones that are a paragraph, or there are ones that are like 3 pages long. And that variety was really, really nice, but I think it just kind of like further exemplified the areas that just weren't as interesting to me. This is the only book here that I think I enjoyed about half the book. Everything else here, I love the majority of it. But this was the one where I'm like, damn, I wish this just had a little bit better short stories. I think in the end, though, I will 100% check out more of Eve Babbitt's work. So despite the fact that this is number 5 on the list, I promise I'll be checking out more of Eve Babbitt's work, honestly, really soon. She was a really intriguing writer. It just kind of sucks that, like, some of them I didn't like as much. Joan Didion's Run River is a book I was never expecting to buy. I was on my way out from a Barnes & Noble. I mentioned it in my last book haul video, but I was on my way out and I quickly grabbed this and another book that will actually be on this list is number 1. A little bit of a tease right there. And it was one of those books that I kind of just was like, I know who Joan Didion is, and I know how prolific of a writer she is, specifically with women's literature and contemporary women's literature. So I quickly grabbed it. And do you guys ever have that experience reading a book where you know that the person writing this book is just so much smarter than you'll ever be? Like, you're reading the book and you're like, I can't believe that we're of the same species. Like, our brains are the same exact type of brains. And despite that clear gap in like intelligence and talent, you still are like, oh, thank you so much. It's like weirdly masochistic. And that's how I felt reading Run River. I don't know what to think about this book. I have to be completely honest. I was not really on board for the first like 30 pages of it. I was kind of a little bit thrown back by Joan Didion's writing style. She really trusts her audience, which I really love and respect. If you've never heard of Run River, it's Joan Didion's debut novel, which I guess is a current trend here and it will continue to be one. And it's set in Sacramento, or like the Sacramento River area. And it tells this story of a married couple, and specifically the kind of like burgeoning in like falling apart relationship that they have. When I was reading this book, what stood out to me the most was Joan Didion's like expert commentary on marriage, on relationships, and specifically how this kind of era of like 1920s to 1950s America was so focused on limiting the roles and the expressions of women, and how marriages were often this very physical and tangible expression of the very oppressive systems that kept women and pushed them down. And we see our main character Lily kind of explore and navigate these systems as her husband Everett goes off to war, kind of retreats within himself and doesn't know how to express any emotion or any love. And I found myself so riveted by the dynamics of their marriage that it single-handedly brought up this book when there are really times where I struggled to get through this. This is actually the book I struggled the most to get through. Not because it was difficult, but I found myself wanting a little bit more exploration of the actual like society and the world around them. We are so hyper-focused in on like one specific location. It feels like kind of like, you guys know, like a bottle episode where an entire location of like a movie or a TV show is set in one specific area. There's this great Hitchcock movie, Dial M for Murder, which is that very thing. But I kind of wish we explored and visited more areas in this world. There are brief little like journeys to like San Francisco or in town around this world, but we are really focused on like the life on this one river and this one little kind of house. And for me, for a long while, I was kind of treading water with this book a little bit. I wasn't sure if this is something that I wanted to include in this video. And that was until we got to the character of Martha. And Martha is single-handedly one of the most interesting and complex characters I've read in any book ever. She is a character who directly represents everything that I'm interested in within these types of books. How this kind of society can so snuff out passion and joy and creativity in life, and ultimately end in the complete change of who a person is. And when Martha is like the focus of the story, it is one of the best books out of this entire month that I've read. Another thing that I really love is Joan Didion does something really smart where she has different perspectives for the story. So we briefly follow Martha's character and we get her perspective, but we follow Lily a lot. She is our protagonist, but there are times where we get Everett's perspective as well. And we get this really strong two-front of this marriage so we can see both sides. And this is what I found so interesting about the story, is this unique perspective offered on this small little town. We really get this small world fully detailed and fully captured. We know every single bit of these characters' lives. There is a section at the beginning of the book, and this is where I started to really get hooked, where we go to a backstory of Lily's father, and we get to a backstory of Everett's father. So we get this generational impact showing that these systems that kept these people in place are not just a one-generation system, but they've been going and going and going, and it's something that I ultimately just found super, super compelling. I wish we got a little bit more with Everett and Lily's kids, but that's not really anything to kind of bump the book down. Ultimately, in terms of Joan Didion, I was very hooked. I love her writing style, I love her prose, and I will 100% be reading more of her stuff as soon as possible. She's one of the most fascinating authors I've ever read, and it sucks that she passed away a couple years ago, but I definitely want to read more of her stuff. I know she was a prolific writer all of her life, and frankly, I think that's a really good testament to this book that it made me want to read more, despite the fact that it's number 4 on this list. I decided to read Naked Earth by Eileen Chang because I was really interested in Chinese literature. It's not really an area I'm super familiar with or an area I'm well read in at all, so this felt like the perfect opportunity to start diving into Chinese literature. And what I found is, well, you guys know me at this point. I'm a slut for oppressive systems, and I'm a slut for how oppressive systems and governments and society work to remove like the autonomy and the creativity of people as a whole. I mean, one of my favorite books ever is 1984, and the best recommendation I can give for this book is, if you're ever curious what 1984 would look like in real life, it's Naked Earth by Eileen Chang. This is a book set in Maoist China. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And I knew nothing about Maoist China. I've actually kind of like gone my entire life knowing very, very little about it, which is a shame because it's a really, really horrific era in Chinese history. I mean, all you have to do is read this book and understand my comparisons to 1984 to understand that this government of like General Mao, or Chairman Mao, I think is how you say it. Basically, our story follows two main characters, Lu Chuan and Sunan. I'm probably butchering those names and I'm so sorry, but we look at as they kind of start to navigate and explore this Maoist controlled China, how they kind of go about society, trying to restructure and revalue property and give it back to the people and take back from those oppressive landowners. And we see this corruption and this oppressive issues firsthand. We see the violence and the animosity and the anger occur to each and every single person. And these two main characters see how violent and horrific the government's orders are in the name of controlling and spreading their message. The start of the book takes place at this kind of like very poor community where two main characters are charged with redistributing the land. And as we see with Lu Chuan, as he is put into a house, and then the owners of that house, despite how kind and nice they are then taken and executed because they're deemed to be landowners, despite the fact that they have worked their entire lives for the small, minuscule property that they've actually made. You see these hard-working people taken and destroyed by this government, and we see our main characters take a step back and reflect, and I fucking love this book. It was a blast to read. This is actually the first book that I read with this challenge for the month, and I'm really glad I started with it because it put me on a really good path forward. Because what I loved about Eileen Chang's writing is, one, it's very, very verbose but simple. The best way to describe it is like Haruki Murakami, one of my favorite authors of all time, but also super problematic. I completely understand why if you don't like him. But one thing that I love about Haruki Murakami's writing is he initially writes in English, and he's a Japanese native speaker, so he forces himself to have simpler prose to convey his message. And that's what I felt like was happening with Eileen Chang and her writing. Her prose is beautiful. It flows. It's very, very fluid. Everything feels naturally connected. Everything goes from one scene to the next. Character dialogue, interactions, descriptions, all feel so tangible and real. But it's simple. It's not too difficult of a read. I never found myself super challenged with this book. I had to look up words and I had to do a lot of external research to even understand what was going on. But in terms of the prose, it was super accessible. And this is what I'm talking about with contemporary classics. Books like Naked Earth by Eileen Chang and books published by NYRB have this certain approachable quality that make them so appealing to read and then reread. This is 100% a book I'm going to reread in the next like 3 to 5 years because in my research on Maoist China, I was super compelled with this book. There is so much interesting things happening in the world, whether it's like when we move away from this like poor community into like actual government roles, and we see this very corruption start to kind of like take apart its own people and how its own propaganda can be used against its own people. It's a fascinating, compelling, and engaging read. I loved the character of Sunan, our main female protagonist, more than anything, and I really can't talk about her role without spoiling the journey that she goes through, but she is a perfect representation of what happens when a woman is placed in this type of society and what that society does to bring that person down. Very early in the story, we kind of see her experience some form of like sexual harassment, and we see her take a reaction against it, and then that entire society pushes her down as being against the cause. And I found that to be, one, really, really tragic and sad, but two, a fascinating exploration into the propaganda machine of the society. How one person taking a step back against the corruption is viewed as like this outsider and this person who is going to overthrow their mission. And I found myself super fucking interested in that. If you've never read any type of Chinese literature, I'd heavily recommend starting with Naked Earth by Lin Chang. It's a really, really damn good book. And in any other month, it would 100% be like number 2 or number 1 on this list. But I think that's just a testament to how good not only this book is, but number 1 and number 2 on my list are. The main reason why I chose this backdrop for book number 2 is honestly just because Olive's poster of the little thing from SpongeBob is just really entertaining, even if this isn't as aesthetically interesting as the other shots. But number 2 is a book called The Girl Who Never Read Noam Chomsky by Jana Cassell, and I really picked it because the title is super fucking intriguing. The Girl Who Never Read Noam Chomsky. And I was like, okay, well, what is this book about? And the opening line is, womanhood and identity are masterfully explored in the span of one woman's entire adult life in this ambitious and startling debut. And I was like, I really love books about someone's entire life. I mean, I love the story of like BoJack Horseman, because usually when you explore someone's entire life, you get these very, very poignant themes of death. And I love the exploration of death in novels. Right now, I'm reading Goodnight Pun Pun, this incredibly beautiful and depressing manga on death and sadness and depression. And I love the exploration of BoJack Horseman, specifically the second to last episode in the entire series. And I love the books like Stoner by John Williams, which I talk about all the time on this channel, and how that's a very, very clear discussion of life and purpose and death. And W. Somerset Maugham's, I think is how you say it, I'm really bad at it, of Human Bondage, a story about accepting mediocrity and accepting your place in life. So I picked up this book, and for the first 40 pages, I hated it. I'm not gonna lie. I am not a big reader of contemporary literature at all. It's a subject that I don't often tackle because it's just not my area of interest right now. So I picked this up. It was published in 2018, and I had just gotten off of reading my books number 1, which I'll talk about, and then Joan Didion's Run River, my number 4. Incredibly subtle and complex books. And this one was like taking subtlety and smashing with a sledgehammer. The first 40 pages of the book, I was not into it. I was actively like, I don't want to read this. Like, I'm going to be completely transparent. But there's a point in the story. There's actually 2 points in the story. The first one is Jana Cassell is clearly an incredibly bright, well-read, talented author. She's aware of criticism, and she's aware of the approach and criticism I think female authors get in this kind of 21st century. So the opening start of this book, it follows Leda, L-E-D-A. You guys can tell me how to pronounce that. It follows Leda as she kind of enters college, and she kind of wants to date and find her purpose and find a man. And you're like, I love romance stories. I'm a massive fucking sap. I cry over beautiful romance. It gets me choked up. I get emotional. I'm a big sap. And I was like, you know what? I'm really down for a good romance book. I'll never be opposed to that. But there's a point where I was like, I wish our character was more developed outside of her drive to just find like a significant other, a partner. And then there's a criticism where Leda is in her creative writing class in college, and she's kind of showing her story to everybody in the class. And the class is filled with a bunch of hipster douchebags, her words, not mine. And there comes a point where someone is giving her the criticism of, oh, I wish your main character wasn't so boy obsessed or boy crazy. And it was at that point it kind of clicked, and I was like, oh, Jana Cassell, whatever your name is, you get this. You know what the criticisms of a female writer are. You know what the criticisms so far of this book have probably been, because I bet that's the exact criticism someone has said about this book so far when she was writing it. And at that point, I was like,
You got me, Jana. I'm an idiot. I'm a fool. I'm clearly playing into exactly what you wanted me to feel. Because then there's a section in this book, and I have it even marked right here, where Letta goes to have, and I'm going to apologize for the language here, she hooks up with a guy from a party, and she goes back to his apartment, and it is the perfect description of what awkward hookup sex is like, and how awkward and cold and alone and like weirdly hostile, not in like an aggressive like sexual assault sense, but weirdly alienating hookup sex can be. And it was so vibrant yet cold and gray that I was immediately taken into this book, that I was like, holy shit, I am so invested in this now. Jana Cassell has me hooked. And what we got is this really, really up and down journey where I kind of loved the book and kind of didn't love it at the same time. And I don't really know what to think about it. My partner Olive, who you guys know about and who's also on my Instagram and who's been in a video, and she'll be coming up in a video probably after this one. The next video might be the one with Olive. And she kind of said something along the lines of like, isn't a book very, very good or exciting if you're so viscerally reactive to it? Like the last time I can remember feeling this way about something is Hana Yanagihara's A Little Life, where I love elements of A Little Life, but I also hate elements of A Little Life. And this is how I felt about this book. This is the last book that I read for this, and I keep thinking about it every single day. It has made me feel ways that I didn't know fiction could make me feel recently since I read John William Stoner. It is this beautiful reflection on life and death and purpose and monotony, and it made me feel certain ways about the direction my life was heading. Frankly, it made me want to put more effort into making videos like this. I want to say that everybody should go out and read this, but I also don't think this book is for a lot of people, and it's a really, really weird feeling. This book is clearly written by a woman, for women, to explore the woman's journey in life. Fuck, I mean, the last line of the book, which I won't spoil, is about the women's role in life. I felt like a passerby exploring a journey that I'm not really privy to, and for that, I felt like I was on this beautiful exploration into a whole other world that I could never be a part of, and I fucking loved it for that. If I were to say anything that I didn't really like the book, I think there is a certain point in which the book moves too fast throughout a character's life. I mean, this book is about 350 pages long, and it spans about maybe 60 to 70 years throughout Lita's life, and there are certain points where decades will skip. And I wanted to see a little bit more of this character because I was so invested in her journey. There's a certain point where we spend a shit ton of time in our character's like early to late 20s, and then it kind of fast forwards through marriage and being a mother and then just death. And I wish we got more time. This is an incredible debut by Jana Cassell. I will be checking out every single book she writes from now on, and she is my go-to contemporary author. I mean it. I was that invested in the book. And it's really, really fun when you find a book like this that is so impactful so off a whim. If you've never read this book, I would highly implore that you check it out. If you've read it, just let me know. I want more people to talk about this with. It's like decently reviewed on Goodreads. I was checking out some people's review and I just abhorrently disagree with the 1/2 and 1 star on Goodreads. Y'all are fucking insane for this. But I would definitely recommend this to anybody who's curious about an exploration into death and the musings of the purpose of life. I'm getting like anxious just thinking about certain scenes of this book. I really, really love this.
Joan Didion's A Year of Magical Thinking, no hyperbole, no jokes, no nothing, is one of the best and most impactful books I've ever read in my entire life. And I honestly kind of came out here into my living room, and please pardon all the noise, because I want to be in a spot that was more comfortable when I talk about the impact that this book has had on me, because I usually record in either my bedroom or in now the spare room that we have that my roommate was in, and then he moved out, so we turned it into an office. And I don't even really know how much I'm going to edit this section, frankly. I kind of want to keep this as raw and honest as possible, so you're going to get the true me on this one. I cried when reading this book. It's never happened to me before, ever, in my entire life. If you have no idea what this book is about, The Year of Magical Thinking, it is about what happened to Joan Didion after her husband dropped dead from a heart attack in her kitchen, and the exploration of grief and sadness and how she lives her life without her husband, her companion for life. And I'm even getting a little choked up thinking about this. It is one of the most heartfelt, heart-wrenching, and beautiful books I've ever read, ever. I really, really genuinely mean that. This is a nonfiction account of Joan Didion's like recollections of grief as she tries to process what the fuck has happened in her life, because at the same time her daughter Quintana is also going through major surgery. She's not okay, she's ill, and we don't know what's going on. And then after finishing this book, finding out that her daughter ended up passing away at 39 is tragic. It's heartbreaking. But again, you guys can just Google the synopsis. I want to talk about the impact that this book had on me. I've gone through a lot of death in my life, truly, at a young age. It was a lot, and I'm a lot better now. I mean, as good as anyone can be going through that at a young age. And this book brought back emotions and feelings and tangible reactions that I only thought that I had ever experienced. Feelings, regrets, guilt, sadness, hopelessness, everything that I thought I alone had experienced. And to find out that someone else has gone through this, but able to put it in a way that I could never vocalize is truly something that I never knew I could connect with this much. I struggled to get through this book, not because it's poorly written, it's masterfully written, but because I felt like I was looking back at my own thoughts when I was 17, when I was a young kid and I didn't know how to process my emotions. Joan Didion's ability to convey life and death and the willingness and the hopefulness to turn back time and to get everything that you lost and to have it again is exactly the exact emotions that I went through when I was younger. And this is gonna sound really cheesy, I usually annotate by putting little marks, little like sticky notes in the book, where I kind of like to just put on passages that really stood out to me or moments that really impacted me. I may have done something a little cheesy here, where I usually will sometimes underline stuff too. I did not mark this book with anything. I marked this book only in pen. The weird mental aspect of this book was marking emotions in pen because I was feeling the exact same thing when I was younger. And the reason I marked it in pen was because of the weird sense of permanence that occurs through it, knowing that like a book like this is so clearly targeted my emotions that I didn't want the little like sticky notes to fall apart and for that passage to be lost to the annals of time as this book inevitably changes locations as I move and as I kind of go about my life. I'm gonna keep this book forever. And I'm going to use this book as a way to grieve and a way to help. And of course, outside of like therapy and actual professional help. But like, I wanted to just remember the moments of this book. And I wanted to keep their permanence in my mind forever. And it's a weird thing and it doesn't really mean a lot. But to me, it meant everything. And there, in terms of like the book itself, I can talk endlessly about it. Joan Didion and her craft and her exploration of grief often does what a lot of us do when we kind of grieve and lose someone, is we search for answers, whether it's in like religion or whether it's in research or whether it's in the comfort of others. And Joan Didion does this through research. She's a writer, she's a learner, she's a lover of books and literature, and she does this dense, complex research that she then conveys to the readers. And what you really see is this beautiful conveying of exactly what you go through and exactly what I've gone through, where you distract yourself from the feelings. There are long passages in this book where she is like quoting a scientific journal about like the effects of grief or the effects of like a heart attack or what happens, and it is not only informative and really actually kind of interesting and maybe want to read more scientific stuff, but it is exactly what I did. And exactly what I feel like a lot of us have done, where you distract yourself, you try to find answers in the unknown. And I just couldn't believe that I found a book like this. And I found it off a whim. I really went to like Barnes & Noble in the Grove in California and like picked a book off a shelf, and I was like, oh, it's Joan Didion's Run River, and then was on my way out and was like, oh, there's like the biographies, and saw this front and center and was like, I wonder what it's like. And I grabbed it, and it's really amazing that you can find books that are this important to your life on a whim like that. Like finding Stoner by John Williams was because my friend Mark, or you might also know him as Drunzo, just gave me the book, and it put me on a different course forever. And I kind of feel the same about this one. If you are ever someone who has ever struggled with loss or sadness or grief, I would recommend reading this book. I would recommend giving it to someone who you know is going through difficult times, because I feel like it's really, really hard to hear someone talk to you and be like, hey man, and like, it's okay, like it's gonna be all right, I'm sorry for your loss. And it's a different kind of emotion to then read it on your own, at your own pace, when you're ready. I read this in 2 days, and I'm gonna read it again soon, frankly, probably in the next month. But this is definitely one of the best books I've ever read. I wish I could convey this a little bit better, and I'm sorry about I hope the video quality is okay on this one, and same with the audio quality. It's just, it means a lot. Yeah, this one hit a little bit different than I was expecting. Like, I would talk to Olive and I was just sad. Like, I was sad for a few days, really. Like, more sad than I've been in a long time. But yeah, that's number one. That's Joan Didion's The Year of Magical Thinking. Okay, so now we're technically at the end of the video, and I didn't really want to cut and change locations, so I thought, why not just end it here as well? Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was a little bit different than I was used to, so any apologies here if it was a little awkward or a little bit, like, weird, I guess, because this was an interesting month. It was a challenge that I was not expecting, and I forced myself to read more and engage more with stuff, and frankly, I felt emotions I hadn't felt in a long time, so I would say an overall productive month, and I'm very, very glad I went through it. It was a really, really fun month to kind of tackle one of these challenges. And if you guys enjoyed watching this, I definitely have more ideas for more challenges that I want to kind of go through, and more kind of reading goals and reading journeys and stuff like that. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. It was a really fun one to make. If you haven't already, go check out my friend Matt's Bookshelf, who officially published his video that he's writing a book. The book's debuting on August 8th. I will be making a video on it, just a heads up. I will be hyped to hype up his book. I'm very excited. And also, Drunzo made a video. He's back. The king is back. So go check out that video. It's a really interesting one, and made me kind of want to read more history stuff. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. If you guys haven't already, go follow me on Instagram. I post some weird, stupid stuff. So if you enjoyed that, if you want to send me an email on my email, if you want to send me an email on my email, if you want to send me an email, go do that. I try to respond to as many as I can. I'm kind of failing a little bit at that, but I promise I'll get to yours eventually. Thank you for following me on this month-long journey of reading, and I hope you guys enjoy, and I hope you guys have a nice rest of your day. I'll see you again soon.